Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Week 7 of the college football season is already upon us, and it will be interesting to see if it can be just as good as a wild Week 6 where we saw 8 teams in the top 25 lose. When I was going through the schedule, I had a very difficult time finding 5 solid games to put up here on the board. We only have 3 ranked versus ranked matchups this week in Week 7, so I had to choose 2 games that I thought would be pretty big games, exciting games, one that had major implications, whether it was in conference play or on the national stage. But there are not as many high-profile games this week as we have seen in previous weeks, but yet we were still able to grab 5, and we're going to break those down for you, and as always, break down our Heisman Watch going into Week 7. So we'll kick things off with number 2 Georgia and number 13 LSU, in my opinion, the biggest game of Week 7. I know College Game Day is going to Wisconsin at Michigan, and I know a lot of people had received backlash for that. They received backlash for not going to Georgia, LSU, or maybe even Washington, Oregon. But this is, I think, the biggest game of Week 7. And the reason is, anytime you go into Death Valley, it's a very difficult place to play, especially LSU coming off a loss last week on the road against Florida. A Florida team that looks very impressive, might give Georgia a run for their money when they face off. I don't think they're going to beat them, but sure to give them a little bit of a fight. But I'm picking the Bulldogs in this one. I know a lot of people might criticize me for this, saying that even though I just said that LSU is a difficult place to play, they're tough coming off a loss, but Georgia, in my mind, has absolutely looked like the number 2 team in the country. This entire year, they deserve to be up there. They are the second best team in the SEC right now, in my opinion. Second best team in the country, only behind, in both SEC and nationally, Alabama. And hopefully we'll get to see a undefeated or a one-loss Georgia team face off against that Alabama squad in the SEC championship game. But the key for this game, though, is Georgia's defense going up against Joe Burrow and LSU, who in my opinion, kind of struggled against Florida last week. Joe Burrow, who hadn't thrown an interception going into that Florida game, threw 2 interceptions in that one, including a very costly pick 6. And another question is, can Georgia's offense get enough production against a very stiff LSU defense? That's going to be the major key in this one. Anytime you go on the road and in any conference, it's extremely difficult. Georgia, I believe, opening up as an 8-point favorite, 7-point favorite, somewhere around there. But I'm going to give the win to the Bulldogs, and I can see this game being very low scoring, very defensive battle. You might not see this game crack 20. I mean, they could, but I think it's going to be very low scoring, kind of come down to turnovers, and maybe who has the ball last. So I'm very excited to see this one against 2 of the best squads in the SEC. Number 7, Washington. Number 17, Oregon. This was a game that I picked back in the summer as one of my major upsets, having Oregon upsetting the Huskies. And I know a lot of people I received backlash for that a little bit. But here, listen to these factors here. Washington's coming off a very unimpressive victory over a winless UCLA team. I know it was on the road, but that was a game that they should have just blown UCLA out of the water. They were better on both sides of the ball against the Bruins, and they only won that game, I think, by a touchdown, maybe 14 points. It was not a very impressive victory for Chris Peterson and his crew. Oregon nearly beat Stanford just a few weeks ago. A Stanford team that's not looking good now, but was looking good at the time. A game Oregon should have won, is now coming off a bye week, and they are at home, one of the most difficult places to play in the entire nation. To me, this is a surefire, not surefire victory, but to me, I feel very confident in picking the Ducks in this one. I love the 2 quarterbacks, Jake Browning and Justin Herbert, going at it. I think this could be a very high-scoring game, unlike Georgia and LSU, but I'm going to pick the Ducks to get a huge win here, and that might just eliminate the Pac-12 from the college football playoff. We mentioned in our recap video that many people thought after Washington's opening loss to Auburn that Stanford would have to be the team to pick up the slack and maybe be the Pac-12 representative in the playoff if they're going to get one. If Washington loses this game, that's 2 losses for them. Their strength of schedule is not going to be good enough, I don't think, to see Washington have 2 losses and sneak into the playoff. So if Oregon gets the win here, I think you just count out the Pac-12. Maybe you can make a case for Oregon to slip in there, but I just don't see it happening. So this is a big game for the Pac-12 as a whole. If you're a Pac-12 fan, you're probably going to be wanting to root for Washington in this one, but I'm still picking the Ducks to get the win. Michigan State, number 8, Penn State. This was a game that was kind of threw in last second to get us to 5 games up here on the board like we always do. Like I said, this is not, to me, a very exciting week. There were a handful of games that were like, these are going to be okay, but they're not big compared to these 3 ranked versus ranked matchups we have. But this one intriguing just because of the history and what happened last year. Penn State coming off that loss to Ohio State, still having a chance to play for the college football playoff, losing on the road to the Spartans. And the Spartans bouncing back big time last year, and a Spartan team, Michigan State team that I thought surely was going to really compete in the Big Ten this year and look maybe like a college football playoff contender. Could they sneak in there? And they have just, to put it frankly, they sucked. They've been horrible. They lost to Arizona State in week 2. Last week losing by 10 to a mediocre, maybe a little above average Northwestern team by 10 points. So this is not a Michigan State team. This is not a Mark D'Antonio team that I was expecting, and I don't think anybody was expecting out of them. So I think Penn State gets a huge win here with revenge on their mind after what happened last year. Michigan State probably a little down on themselves coming off that embarrassing loss in Northwestern, and that's kind of what happened to Penn State last year. They were in that game, huge weather delay, but a little hurt, a little down on themselves morale-wise after that crushing blow to Ohio State. So I think the Nittany Lions win big in this one and get a solid win over the Spartans and keep their playoff hopes alive. And then number 10, UCF at Memphis. This is a very intriguing game, and as we all know, this was a rematch of the American Athletic Conference Championship game that we saw last year. I think that game was, 62-55 in double overtime. A very thrilling game, huge shootout, something that we could see again this coming week. Central Florida, though, number 10 in the nation, and they're ranked there for a reason. Some people will say they're ranked too high, that they don't deserve to be there because they haven't beaten anybody, but they've beaten a couple Power 5 schools. They beat a Power 5 school to close out last year, beating Auburn in the Peach Bowl. So this is a huge game, more so for Central Florida than it is for Memphis, just to keep their New Year's Six Bowl hopes alive and maybe even college football playoff. Do they deserve to maybe be considered for one of the top 4 spots? I mean, if they run the table and finish the season undefeated, you're definitely going to be hearing a lot of people making the case for the Knights to get in to the college football playoff. That's going to be up to the committee, up to their rankings, but I'm very interested to see how that turns out, though. But this is going to be a game that's a little bit different, though. Memphis, as we've seen in the past, usually relying on the pass game with Riley Ferguson or Paxton Lynch or somebody like that. And now they've got Darrell Henderson, a solid running back, a potential Heisman dark horse, who has 934 yards already this year, 12 touchdowns, and is averaging 11.8 yards per carry. That is insane. He is the leading rusher in the NCAA right now in all of college football. So UCF is going to have to do a really good job bottling him up. Memphis is going to have to do a very good job of bottling up Mackenzie Milton, as always, one of the better quarterbacks, I think, in the entire nation. So this is going to be a very fun game. It's not very often you see a group of 5 schools up here on the big board. Second time UCF has been up here, but they deserve to be. This is a very big game, one that you should definitely keep your eye on. But I'm going to give the win to the Knights. I think they're going to be too much offensively for Memphis, who only has 2 losses this year, one to Navy, understandable, but the other one a blowout loss to Tulane. That's one that you just really, even though Tulane has improved a little bit, one that you really can't excuse. So I think Central Florida gets a huge win on the road. And then our last game, number 15, Wisconsin, at number 12, Michigan, where College Game Day is going this week, despite what some people might say, agree or disagree with. This is a very big game. This is a huge game for Big Ten play, and for both Michigan and Wisconsin, too. This is a cross-division game. Wisconsin's still alive, obviously, in their division, and I would think still the favorite in their division, and still maybe has a chance at the college football playoff. If they win out, including a solid win here from Michigan, and then beating whoever it is on the other side of the division, whether it's probably Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. Could they slip in as a one-loss Big Ten champion? I think they would. But this game is very big for Michigan as well, who right now only has, I believe, just 1 loss to Notre Dame. They haven't lost since that Notre Dame game. They're undefeated in conference play, and they need to continue that. They get a win here, they propel back into the top 10. They're still in the hunt, still have a chance to set up a huge day against Ohio State at the season finale to maybe win that division and try to get into the college football playoff. I'm giving the win to the Wolverines. Home field advantage is going to be huge for this one. As always, anytime you play in Michigan, anytime you play at LSU, it's a very difficult place to play. So home field advantage will be a major contributing factor. Michigan, I believe, owns the edge at quarterback just a little bit. Alex Hornibrook, a great quarterback, very underrated, but I think Shea Patterson's going to get enough done in this game to get the win over the Badgers. But you can't sleep on Wisconsin. I believe they are a lot better than that 15th ranked. Number 15 really shows. I know they lost to BYU, who's been struggling as of late. A game they shouldn't have lost. Had they not lost, they'd be in the top 10 right now. Wisconsin's much better than that. They're slowly picking up wins, slowly kind of finding their identity once again. So Michigan, if they can bottle up Jonathan Taylor, they get the win. If not, I think Wisconsin's going to be able to come in here and get a solid victory. But I'm sticking with the Wolverines. So these are our top 5 games for Week 7. Obviously not the most exciting slate, but still some very big ones, especially these 3 ranked versus ranked matchups. These are going to be the ones you're going to want to watch all day, ones that I'm definitely looking forward to. So our Heisman Watch. Starting next week, we will rank these guys in the order that kind of how I feel. We'll rank our Heisman contenders 1 through 4, 1 through 5, however many are up here. But for right now, we're just going to go through the stats again, kind of give you a little insight on what we think. But starting next week, we'll actually rank them. So we'll start off with Tua Tagovailoa. Obviously, I think right now the heavy favorite across the board, no matter where you look. Last week against Arkansas, 334 yards and 4 touchdowns. And of course, he's not even playing the entire game. Yeah, I don't think he has played the entire game all season. so he's putting up complete game numbers. Some of these quarterbacks are putting up the same amount of numbers that Tua Tagovailoa is in like a half, if that makes sense. I mean, he's putting up insane numbers. I don't think he's thrown an interception at all this season. In my opinion, he is a surefire bet for the Heisman Trophy right now, unless he just starts to slip and tank as the season goes on. So another great performance by him. I don't really see anyone upsetting the Tide over the course of this season. And then you got Will Grier, and like I said, this is not in any order as of right now. Had a very sloppy game against Kansas, and I think his stock really fell in this game. He did have 4 touchdowns. He did throw for 332 yards. He's consistently getting multi-touchdown games, 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, consistently throwing for over 300 yards, but had 4 turnovers against Kansas, 3 interceptions, and a lost fumble. If they're playing any other team than Kansas, I think West Virginia loses that game, and a lot of that would be on Will Grier. And so that's something you got to keep in mind. They won that game by 16, but they're playing a better team. That's not going to slide. You can't afford to commit that many turnovers. So Will Grier still in the Heisman Watch for now, especially for what he's been doing for this West Virginia team, but they've got to watch the turnovers. Very sloppy performance against a below-average team. Kyler Murray, Oklahoma, and a losing effort, put up some very big numbers as well. He had 396 all-purpose yards, very impressive there. 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, yet still lost to Texas 48-45. But led a great comeback, down 21, and got all the way back before losing ultimately in the final seconds. But he was the leading passer and the leading rusher for the Sooners in that Texas game. So without a doubt, it still deserves to be up here. And then Dwayne Haskins with Ohio State. Like I've said before, this is, to me, the year of the quarterback. I don't see any running back that should be thrown into the Heisman conversation. We mentioned Darrell Henderson at Memphis, and maybe he deserves to be in there as a leading rusher right now. He's putting up some big-time numbers. Maybe Benny Snell putting up good numbers with Kentucky, but Bryce Love's out of the equation. Part of that's on him, part of that's on injury. You can't help that. Jonathan Taylor's in there playing some good ball with Wisconsin, but he hasn't looked like his old self that we saw last year. This is the year of the quarterback to me, so I think the guys that get invited to that ceremony are all going to be quarterbacks. And like I said, Dwayne Haskins, didn't forget about him, 455 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions in a blowout win over Indiana. That was actually a little more close than I thought it was going to be. So, but still, nonetheless, big-time numbers put up by Haskins. He is the Buckeyes' man. And these are my top 4 quarterbacks going into Week 7. These are my top 4 Heisman contenders going into Week 7. It is the year of the quarterback. Without a doubt, in my mind, it is the year of the quarterback. And if I had to choose right now, that Heisman Trophy is going to Tua Tagovailoa. But next week, we will be ranking all of these guys in order the way we see the Heisman Watch stacking up. So our top 5 games for Week 7, get ready. It's going to be a very exciting week of college football kicking off on Tuesday night. Against Arkansas State and Appalachian State, obviously, but really start things getting better starting on Thursday and carrying over through Saturday. So make sure you keep your eye out for that. Go check us out on Predictive for some extra analysis and some predictions there. Go check us out on Twitter at Gridiron Expert, and as always, please continue to check us out here on YouTube, and please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Gridiron Expert.